Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have the pleasure of Corina Walsh on the show. Welcome to you, Corina.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. You're all the way from Canada.
Mhm.
I think it's around about midday for you, and it's later on in the afternoon for me. You're the owner of Shift People Development, which offers group leadership programs that fill the gaps for the fundamentals of leadership required for any new or experienced manager.
Mhm.
You are a certified coach, a keynote speaker, and also the author of the Engaged Employee Blueprint, Build a Workplace Culture Where Employees Thrive. And today we will be exploring how to develop sort of frontline leaders, talking about emerging leaders, how to train them, how to develop them, what challenges they may face. But before we go there, I want to ask you, Corina, what do you love about what you do?
Great question. What I love about what I do is when I get to see the little aha moment that managers have. So typically when managers and if some business owners too come to my programs, whether it's the group program or one-on-one leadership coaching, they're having some frustrations, whether it's they can't get through to their employees or they're not delegating effectively or whatever the struggle may be for them. And either we create a simple perspective shift to help them see something differently, or whether I give them one of my tools, one of my very straightforward, actionable tools, and you just see the change on their face where
Mm.
the stress and the tension starts to melt away a little bit because they realize, oh, there's something that can help with this. There's an aspirin for this, and it's in the form of a tool or a template or something like that I've created to help managers. And it's just seeing that look on their face, seeing the relief, and then when they come back to the next session and I get to hear about the results. It's always about the results for me and the impact. So when I get to hear about how they've implemented a tool and the difference now that they're experiencing at work, that's it right there for me. That's what I live for.
It is rewarding, isn't it, when people get
Mm.
those moments of aha and sort of wow moments, and it really just changed something, and almost you can sometimes see a bodily change sometimes in people, can't you, when they suddenly get a absolute moment and think, wow, they've got it, and sometimes they just come out from a question or obviously a program that you're doing. But as you say, it's then what that moment does changes that sort of outcome, the results, the impact it has. That's great. That's what I love about it as well. So we're very similar in that.
Mhm.
And we're talking about obviously developing people, developing sort of frontline managers and sort of emerging leaders. Before we go there, I wanted to get from your understanding, if you're in an organization, what should we be looking out for in terms of spotting people who have got that leadership potential? Because obviously people don't walk around with little labels on them. People don't always share their aspirations. Some people keep them to themselves. So what should we be looking for in our teams that thinks, I think they've got some potential of being a leader?
That would be nice if we all walked around with labels on us, wouldn't it? With our strengths sewn into our sweater or
Yes.
something. That would be fantastic. Or communication style. I
That would
love
be
that you.
really helpful, wouldn't it? It really would, wouldn't it?
Yeah, the disc model. I'm a high D and a low C.
Yes.
um, I'm glad you asked that question. It's so important. What I advise companies to look for. So typically, people get promoted often because of their technical abilities. It's the high performer, it's the person who's excelling on a technical level. And I understand why companies promote them. And I'm not saying don't promote your best technical people. That's my specialty. I help technical experts become effective people managers. But there's other things that you should be looking for aside from high technical competence, aside from being a high performer. I would be looking for maybe even an average performer, someone who's doing their job well, and they're consistent with their performance, and maybe they all already have the basis for strong people skills. Maybe they're already doing a little bit of teaching or training with some more junior employees. Maybe they already have some innate communication skills. They already have some empathy and or coachability. I mean, coachability is key in terms of becoming an effective leader. You have to be coachable. So I would be looking for someone who, they're good, they're a consistent performer, but they also are showing potential for being able to attach and develop to those people leadership skills that are so critical. And I can't stress enough, they have to be coachable. You're going to have a hard time developing any emerging leader if they're not coachable. They have to be coachable and trainable.
You made a valid point there, and I think a lot of organizations make that mistake. We have the salesman who's hitting everything out the park, doing really well. Therefore, they must come the next team leader or manager or whatever it is. And then sometimes there's an assumption from them that's the next progression, isn't it? So to progress your career, you've got to lead people. That's not always the case. So how do we? Because that becomes like an assumption, doesn't it? How do we handle that in a situation where perhaps, as you say, you've got the star performer who perhaps hasn't got at that point or showing leadership sort of qualities, and perhaps they've just not been allowed to or express that, and somebody else is, but they're average. How do we sort of manage that tension potentially in a team when you're saying this average performer is going to become the boss of a serious high performer as well?
I think it comes from being very transparent with what building the leadership pipeline looks like in your organization. These shouldn't be trade secrets that you're keeping from your employees. This should be an open communication that's happening consistently within the organization. It's expectation setting, making it a well-known fact within the company that this is part of our culture. We don't just promote the best technical people. We look for the multifaceted individual who's going to be a good leader all around. And how do you handle, the tension of potentially someone who's an average performer now becoming the boss? I'm a fan of having two leadership tracks. And one is more of the people leadership track where you lead teams of people. And the other one is more of the business or technical leadership track. I think some companies are doing that well, but I think it's still very new for a lot of companies. We only have one leadership track and it's a people leadership track. And I find that to be kind of short-sighted and unfair, right? It's unfair because the technical person might not even want to lead a team of people, but they still deserve a career path that works for them. And maybe they are interested in leading people, but they know it's going to take a certain level of leadership development from them. So I'm a fan of having two different leadership tracks, a people leader track, and then maybe the business or technical side where it's a different level of responsibility that you're taking on. It's more the business growth side of things or the technical growth side of things, as opposed to being the one that leads teams of people. And I think it's possible. It's absolutely possible.
I think that's important because, as you say, I think there's some people out there who excel at something, but they don't want to become involved in leadership or in managing people. That's not their thing, which is fine. And I think it's important to look at every aspect of how we develop people, isn't it? And actually taking people who become almost subject matter experts, within their field. They can become mentors. They don't have to be any sort of managerial. They can become mentors. They can be ambassadors or advocates, what do you want to call it, in an organization or even outside of it, can't they? It's not. I think there's a bit of a, as you say, a one-dimensional, isn't it? If you want to progress, you've got to be able to manage teams. And it depends on what your progression is, isn't it, and where you're going. And I think so is conversations, isn't it? Open conversations. Where do you want to go? And then you work out how you're going to get there. And it might be more of an expert route as opposed to a sort of people management. So how do we create that culture? Because, going back to the example of the high performer and the average performer, and perhaps the average performers just not had the opportunity to show leadership. Perhaps they do have a sense of leadership. How do we create a culture or an environment that would create more opportunities for people to display and show their leadership potential? I mean, what have you been doing in your workplace, or where you've worked yourself? How have you sort of created cultures for that?
Yeah, I advise companies to give any employee the chance to practice some leadership activities in a low risk environment. So, one of the activities that I advise companies to do is allow employees who are not yet in a management role to rotate chairing a meeting. Something as simple as rotating those type of tasks that are typically held closely, held tightly,
Mm,
maybe by management. Why wouldn't you give that over to an employee and see what they're made of and see what they can do? And if there's resistance and they don't want to do it, okay, that's fine. Maybe they're not ready. Let's go see if another employee wants to take over that task.
mm,
Uh, but there's no reason why those type of things, have it has to be the manager sitting at the head of the table, always chairing the meeting. You can definitely rotate those type of tasks as long as it's a safe, a low risk environment. I wouldn't necessarily be rotating those type of tasks if it's customer facing or high stakes. Maybe it's a meeting where the entire board is coming in. You
mm,
know, again, it has to be a low risk environment, but there's no reason why employees can't be taking over some of those tasks. So you as the manager, as their manager, can observe them in action, take them along to a client meeting and see what
mm.
kind of questions they ask, observe them in action and see, and what are you noticing? Are you noticing the kind of attributes that you look for in managers in your company? And the career conversations are critical too, right?
Mm,
I mean, if you see something in someone, tell them and bring it into your one on ones and bring it into your performance management conversations. What are your career aspirations? Have you ever considered this? Are you considering management? Why don't we try you on a stretch goal or a stretch task
mm.
and see how it goes? Again, low risk environment, but I see no reason why employees couldn't be trying out those types of tasks to see what their potential is.
And it's sort of facilitated in a more of an empowering in organization, isn't it? Where you're allowing people to, under guidance and support, to go off under their own sort of energy and initiative. And I think there's a risk to that. There's always a risk. Of course, there is always a risk, but there's a risk not doing it as well. And I think it's almost a fundamental in a culture to create that more empowering, isn't it?
It is for sure. And one thing, if anyone's been following my LinkedIn posts or if you've been following along on my LinkedIn posts, I've been very vocal about this. I do not like, speaking of culture, I do not like baptism by fire or throwing someone to the wolves, whatever
Mm,
phrase, cliche you want to go with. Um, it happened throughout my entire career, and I remember hearing my coworkers say, "Oh, it's baptism by fire around here. They just throw you in, and you have to. It's sink or swim." And that's the opposite of the type of culture that you just described,
mm,
where it's safe for an employee to take a step forward and try something new. And it's done in an empowering way because they're getting the support that they need. And it's a gradual increase in responsibility.
mm,
But I very much dislike the sink or swim model. Oh, this team needs a team leader. So you're the best one on the team and it's going to be you. And we're not going to give you any management training, until maybe you come and ask for it because you finally realize there's management training out there that could help you with this.
mm,
Not a fan of that. And I feel that that's what creates the toxic culture or
mm.
the disempowered culture where new managers just don't get what they need to be supported.
No, and I think also if there's a culture where it is a bit of a sink or swim, or a culture where failure is sort of frowned upon, people won't be willing to step up because, when you're new into anything, management or any specialist skill, you will make mistakes. Fact, won't do things quite well, and you need to be an environment, or psychologically safe environment where people feel it's okay to make mistakes. Obviously, we don't go out to make mistakes, but it's okay to if we do, as long as we can learn from them, we can take some learnings. That's really important, isn't it?
It is really important. That psychological safety that you just mentioned, it's key for learning.
So we have these potential environment of empowerment. We have an environment that's safe, and we've got some potential leaders who are going to step up or allow them to sort of grow, or I guess blossom is probably a better phrase. What are the first things we should do to support them? Because we talked about support, and we think that's important, rather than just saying you are now a manager of these people, go off and manage and do those things. What sort of support, and how can we sort of help them? Because I think this is, as we say, a lot of companies don't do this, where they don't support it. They just throw them in, they pay them more money, and therefore we paid you more money, therefore you should be doing exactly what I expect you to do as a manager. So what are the sort of mechanisms, support that you think we should put in place?
For me, it's a three-part approach. The first part is training, of course. And I mean, there is training for frontline. I call them frontline leaders, emerging leaders. It's that first level of management. I can't stress enough the importance of helping new managers, supervisors, team leads, whatever you call them in your organization. I can't stress enough the importance of helping them build a foundation for their leadership journey, because it's going to build confidence. And I mean, I'm sure in your work, you've heard stories about someone who was promoted to their first management role, didn't get the training and support that they needed, and ended up with having a really bad experience, maybe with an employee. And they just stepped away and now refuse to go back into a management role, when in actual fact, had they received the training that they needed, perhaps they could have been a great manager. And sometimes even new managers don't even realize that that knowing how to have a difficult conversation is an actual skill set. There's training available on that. There's training available on how to delegate effectively. There's actually a lot of moving parts to know how to be a good delegator. And that's the type of training that new managers need. They need frontline leadership development. So they need to learn, they need the training on how to delegate, how to give feedback, how to have a basic coaching conversation, how to navigate that difficult situation. And then, but it's not just training. Training alone is not enough. There has to be support from their manager. So what a lot of companies do, they send one group of managers to my program, and then they send, start sending maybe their emerging leaders, because then the managers of those emerging leaders know how to coach the new leaders, the new managers coming up through. So it's getting them the training, having a manager who can coach them and support them. That's the second.
So making sure the manager then has the skills to coach, because as you say, that's just not a natural thing neither, isn't it? It's asking the right questions. How do you get those conversations? How do you inspire somebody? So that's important as well, isn't it? It's not, because I think it's, if you've got poor leadership trying to bring more leadership along, you just end up with lots of poor leadership.
Basically, yeah. And what happens with a lot of the companies that come to me, I mean, they might send their emerging leaders, but the managers of those emerging leaders never had that leadership development either. So then they realize they have to send that group as well, which I'm quite happy with, of course, because that's what I want. I want everyone to have the same training. But yes, having a manager who can support you on your, as you start off on this leadership journey, is critical. And then the third piece of the puzzle is feedback. When you are, well, everyone in the organization should be getting and giving feedback. Feedback should be going in every direction, not just top down. But when you're a new manager, you need to be getting direct feedback from your team, the people who report to you, because you need to understand the impact that you're having on your team immediately, so you can self-correct in the moment. So one of the best companies that I have as a client who sends their managers to my program, they're using technology to help facilitate that feedback. I can't quite remember the name of the program now. It might be like Pecan or 15.5 or something like that. And, team members get to send feedback up to their manager. They have that culture. It's expected.
Is it a platform that they type in literally on their app, I guess, on their phone? Is that how it's facilitated?
It is, yes, and they get prompted with specific questions, and the manager can change the questions and look for something specific. So look for specific feedback related to something like
Okay.
how are our one-on-ones going for you? Are we meeting often enough? Am I supporting you in the way you need to be supported? So getting instant feedback from your team, especially when you're a new manager, so you can gauge how you're doing,
Mm.
gauge the impact you're having on your team, and
And is
self-correct.
that an anonymous sort of feedback, or is it by person?
It's anonymous. A lot of the times it's anonymous. I encourage companies to, however, though, to create that psychological safety that you mentioned earlier and make it okay to also give this feedback in conversation, not just on the app,
Mm.
right? Let's
I mean,
get
how do we
comfortable.
create that sort of, because without obviously the app's great, and it's great to have that technology now, but if you haven't got access to that, how do we create that environment where we get, okay, true feedback, honest feedback that would help you guide you in terms of your style of management and your have greater impact?
So it has to be part of the organizational processes. It has to be a part of the culture. It's expectation setting from the leaders of the company that this is how we operate. We welcome feedback. We feedback goes in every direction. I know I sound like a broken record, and training is key,
Mm.
because you have to know how to say the feedback. You have to know how to deliver it, right?
Mm.
It's a technical skill to know how to deliver good feedback. So getting everyone the same training so that they all know how to deliver feedback in a way that's effective makes it feel a little bit safer to
Mm.
deliver that feedback. But the final piece there is that all managers have to understand that when they do get feedback from, whether it's from another manager, from a direct report, how you respond to that feedback is going to determine whether or not you create that
Mm.
psychological safety. Because if you give me feedback and I get offended, or if I get defensive, the psychological safety is gone, right?
Totally, yeah.
So there's a little bit of emotional intelligence that
And how do we? Because because obviously we all want. I remember when my first sort of sales role, I always kept eliciting from my boss feedback on how I was doing. When he came out with me, observed me, I really welcomed it because I was just wanted to learn and be better at what I did. Um, the more you sort of go up the chain of command, so to speak, as much as I did elicit it becomes harder to take because
sure.
because you're thinking, you potentially get a little bit set in your own ways, and also potentially you're thinking, oh, that's harsh, isn't it? Or it might, or they misinterpret or whatever. You can put an excuse on everything, but how do we sort of not take the emotion out of it, but how do we deal with some tough feedback? I guess it can be quite harsh sometimes, can't it?
It could be, yes. Um, and I think whenever we get feedback, I think in terms of if we're going to be emotionally intelligent about it, first and foremost, acknowledging to yourself that that was difficult to hear. But and so don't block out the emotion. Deal with it and deal with how you feel first,
Mm.
and then take a step back and put on your critical awareness lens and ask yourself, like, what part of this feedback is actionable that I can take right now and use? And what part of the feedback is not so useful for me right now? And do I need to go back and have a second conversation with my manager about that?
Mm.
Say, I'm not really sure this is the most useful feedback, or I need to understand more about the context of where this feedback is coming from because it felt a bit harsh. But taking a step back and saying and asking yourself, how might I use this
Mm.
feedback, and of what benefit will it be to me if I use this feedback? So it's putting
Okay.
on that lens of critical awareness so you can
Mm.
make it work for you.
Yeah, because going back to the technology piece, and I think that can be helpful. But I've done 360s, and I've had
Mm.
360s, and you get the verbatim stuff as well. And sometimes that can be really helpful, but sometimes it can be unhelpful because it's slightly out of context. Sometimes people just put a random, it's not randomness that's in their head, but the way it's come out of context, it appears very random. And it's like, I'm not entirely sure what they're saying here, or it doesn't really. So actually having that conversation where, as you say, you can actually not challenge it, but at least question a little bit more about why they're saying what they're doing, which is to just get a bit more understanding, isn't it? It's really helpful.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So as new leaders will make mistakes, and just before we finish, it'd be good to just how to handle those mistakes and those failures and those things that have just gone wrong and you're new in, and that can be quite a shock to your system and quite
Mm.
a blow to your confidence, I guess, in terms of moving forward. So how, if you're new, you've just started to lead and you just make a gaffe and it's completely wrong, how should we deal with that? How should we sort of process it?
That's an important question too, because we all make mistakes, and you really don't want to internalize those mistakes and let it be a hit to your self-esteem. And I have had many managers come to me for coaching who have done that. They've internalized their mistakes and allowed the mistake to kind of challenge their self-worth. So first thing first, recognize that everyone makes mistakes. Every new manager and even plenty of experienced managers make mistakes. Mistakes are often how we learn. So, just like accepting tough feedback can be challenging, you have to take a step back from your mistake and realize this is a mistake I made. This is not who I am. What can I learn from this mistake to make sure it never happens again? So, again, it's adding that critical awareness lens to make sure you understand I am not my mistakes. Then I would go and speak with a mentor that I trusted. And if you're a good mentor or a coach or a good, if it's your manager that you're talking to, they will hopefully share some of their mistakes with you. So you understand that, oh, I'm not alone. Look at what that person did. That was even worse than what I did.
Mhm.
And I'm saying that because one of the best managers I ever worked with, that's what he did. Whenever someone came in feeling really low because they had just made a mistake, he would say, "That's nothing. You should hear what I did once," and turn it into a moment of humor
Mhm.
because you have to be able to laugh at yourself and have that shoulder, I guess, to lean on when you do make those mistakes. But don't internalize it and let
Mhm.
it, lower your own self-esteem.
And I guess just to add to that is look for a learning, isn't it, of how
Mhm.
you might gain some insights to perhaps why it went wrong, and what you could do differently next time, and see it
Mm.
as a learning. I often talk to a lot of my clients, and obviously we talk about the word failure, but I say use the word feedback. It's just a way of,
Mm.
you've just not got it right, which is fine. Just learn from it, do a loop of learning, and embed it, and do it differently next time. If you keep going back to the same mistake, then there's something not quite right there. You're not learning. You need to learn, and that goes back to you saying you need to be coachable and need to be a person who learns. It's been really good to talk to you, Corina. I've really liked your wisdom and your advice, actually, on helping newly emerged leaders as they step up. That's really helpful. If people want to get in touch with you and connect with you, what's the best way of doing that?
I've really enjoyed our conversation as well. The best way to get in touch with me, definitely connect on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn because that's where I post my best content, my best tools, strategies, insights, articles. So LinkedIn is a great way to get in touch with me. My website is www.shiftpd.com. So feel free to go onto my website. My email address and phone number are at the top of the page. So either one of those ways are great to get in touch with me.
Well, thank you for your time, Corina. Really, thank you. Appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.